Welcome, everybody. This is really exciting. This is the first one of our digital discussions for our brand new exhibit, which has just been announced this week, Milwaukee, Where the Waters Meet. So I hope you're all ready for water-related programming coming up over the next weeks and months, as this is our 2021 feature exhibit. The exhibit, as you can see it, will be open a week from today on January 28th. So make sure you write that down and make sure you come by to see it. Our curator, Ben Barra, has done just one heck of a good job telling the story of what water has played throughout the history of Milwaukee and our present and our future as well. So the exhibit opens a week from today. Also a week from today, we're really starting our programming off with a bang, not only with Tamara Thomsen from the State Historical Society talking about shipwrecks and diving and things like that tonight, but a week from today, we have John Gerda doing Milwaukee, a city built on water. That is going to be broadcast like you're seeing it right now on Facebook and YouTube, as well as our Twitter account. That is a pay what you want to type of event. So please do donate to us to keep programming like that coming. You can do so at milwaukeehistory.net. All right, let's bring in the lady of the hour, Tamara Thomsen from the Wisconsin State Historical Society. We're just awesomely lucky to have Tamara kicking off our speaking series for this exhibit. Tamara's Maritime. There we go. With the Wisconsin Historical Society's Maritime Preservation and Archaeology program, her research has resulted in the nomination of 57 different submerged historical sites to the National Register of Historical Places. And she's on all sorts of awards and Hall of Fame, as well as working on some incredible projects, including with the Titanic. So like just runs the whole gamut as far as being a diver. So Tamara, welcome to our digital discussion.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. And we're going to do a question and answer. So you can think about those questions, put those in the comments as you think of them, and we'll get to those after Tamara's presentation tonight. So make sure you do that. That's all I have to say. So Tamara, I'll see you on the other side of this. And and everybody, Tamara Thomsen, enjoy.
Well, it's quite an honor to be here at the opening of this exhibit. I to go and visit myself. I saw a sneak preview today. I'm pretty excited for everyone in Milwaukee and at the Historical Society. Something new to share this year. I'm going to spend the first part of my presentation telling you a little bit about what I do for the state. I am an underwater archaeologist. I'm part of a team. There are two of us that work full-time at the society that do what I do. And then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a couple projects. In fact, I'm going to cover three of them that we've recently undertaken on shipwrecks in the Milwaukee area. So first off, I have to get a couple things out of the way because I always end up with questions. The first is this ship. This is not in Milwaukee. In fact, it's not in the Great Lakes at all. This is the Titanic. Lost the 15th of April, 1912. And a lot of people will jump right to this and want to talk to me about Titanic, but we actually have a lot of really fantastic shipwrecks in the Great Lakes. And I hope people realize that there's a lot of interesting history that we have on our lake bottoms and right in our backyards. So then once I kind of discount the Titanic, the next thing we get to is Edmund Fitzgerald. And of course, it has a very significant Milwaukee tie, named for Edmund Fitzgerald of the Northwestern Mutual Insurance Company of Milwaukee. And really the ship was bankrolled and home ported in Milwaukee. And but it is not lost in U.S. waters or Wisconsin waters, but it is lost in the Great Lakes. Again, lost the 10th of November, 1975. But more shipwrecks that we have here that we can focus on right in our backyard. And, early on when our office was formed, we went through and we looked at a number of historic documents and looking at newspapers, insurance documents, anything that would try to give us a number and a listing of how many shipwrecks, how many historic losses there might be. And this is a moving target, but we estimate there to be 727 shipwrecks lost in all of Wisconsin waters. These are commercial vessels that would be lost to the Great Lake, our inland waterways as well. And of those, we know of only where 203 are located. Again, in moving target, it changes every year. We have a number of shipwrecks that are discovered each year with technology advancing and becoming more something that really anyone can buy. You get a depth sounder and a bottom finder, and really go out and do a little historic research and find shipwrecks. So if you'd like to take your hand at it, there's still a number of them that are missing, and we have a great archive to work from to help you try to narrow down some of the searches. We love being able to get new shipwrecks and learn the history and sort of fill in the blanks of a lot of the missing information that we have about our maritime history. So to understand really the importance of maritime history to our state, we really only have to look as far as our state seal. Here we see, of course, the iconic sailor. You see an anchor. And as far as the other, we have one more symbol on our seal, which is influenced by maritime culture here in the state, and that is the arm and hammer. This was put on our state seal to represent prowess in industry. And however, this is a very specific tool that was used in the maritime trades. This is a caulking mallet, and it was used to pound oakum in between the planks of wooden ships in order to seal them. So we can see how important it was really even at the founding of our state and the creation of this seal as maritime and maritime history to us. Well, why do we have so many shipwrecks here in Wisconsin? It's really because we are in the middle of this maritime superhighway. So before there were roads, and really before the trains made their way out to this part of the country, it was much easier and faster to get goods and to transport passengers and immigrants to the western frontier going by waterway. And we had these massive ports, not only Milwaukee, but Chicago on the southern end of Lake Michigan. And so we see a lot of ships wrecking in routes, either in collision or early steamships caught fire. Sometimes there was not some of the shoals mapped as well as they are today. And so there was a lot of strandings that occurred as well. And that's really what drove a lot of ships to the bottom of the lake within our state waters. So what I do, and others in my office do, is we conduct what's called phase 2 archaeological surveys. We do 2 or 3 of these a year, and it really depends on the funding. And what this means is that we lay a baseline down the center of the ship, and you see this baseline laid out here. And then we divide the ship into 10-foot sections, and divers are assigned. We work with volunteers, but we also dive ourselves and go down, and we map in place everything that we see on the bottom. So we're drawing to scale everything that we see. This is important really because a lot of these early ships were never made with blueprints, and if there are blueprints that exist, they're usually for these later vessels. So shipbuilding was really a craft that was it was learned through apprenticeship. And there's an evolution of design that happens really with each one of the shipbuilders. So for us to understand how they were constructed, why they were constructed in a certain way, how those construction features evolved over time. A lot of that we learn just from the archaeological record, the shipwrecks that are on the bottom. And so this particular ship is the Northerner. It was built in 1851 and lost in 1868, and it's off Port Washington. And this is one of those many shipwrecks that we have in Wisconsin that's listed on the National Register of Historic Places. So a survey like this takes a week or two with a number of volunteer divers. Not all of our shipwrecks, however, are deep. This one is in 130 feet of water, but some of them are even up on our coastline. So we have shore wrecks as well. This is the schooner Iris, which is up in Jackson Harbor, Washington Island, Door County. So there's a wide variety of very deep things that it can only be seen, shipwrecks that can only be visited with remotely operated vehicles. So divers, it's too deep for even divers to go down to look at. And so the data is collected with sonar imagery, and those that are very shallow, that are embedded in the beaches all along our coastline. So what we do is we create then with this information is a scaled drawing. So this is a drawing to scale. It's called a site plan. It's an overall look at what is on the bottom.
We're going to try to get Tamara back here. Just be very patient. I appreciate that. Just be a quick second, I hope. We got you back. I just sent you a message. It's okay.
I could tell my green dot on my camera went off. So
well, that's lucky. You know, when you're broadcasting from underwater, these things are bound to happen. So let's get your screen shared again, and we'll get back into the program.
Okay.
Sorry, everybody.
Could you remind me?
Right after you were talking about Washington Island and shipwrecks off the coast of there.
Right.
That's what I seem to remember last.
Fantastic. Thank you.
So. Thank you for your patience, everybody.
Thank you for yours. Oh my goodness.
All right, we got you. There we go. That looks right.
Okay.
That looks where we left off.
Okay.
All right, take it away. Hopefully,
all right. So we create with all the information that we gather, we create these site plans. So these are drawings to scale of what's on the bottom, and so we can understand not only what the shipwreck looks like at the particular time of collecting this data, but it also gives us a point of time reference to compare this to over time. So we can go back and collect data again and see if there's any changes that occur to a particular site. We also collect information on the cultural items that are still remain on the shipwreck. So here, this is the schooner home. It's in 180 feet of water, and we see a couple of water jugs that still remain on the shipwreck. So it's been illegal to remove items from shipwrecks since the passing of the Abandoned Shipwreck Act in 1987. So understanding what remains on shipwrecks that were found before 87 is important, because this allows us to catalog everything that would be there. These are time capsules. We have to understand, as they went down, they would have carried everything that would have been aboard and used on in shipboard life. They also would really be representative of cargoes that were going to some of the hinterland communities around the lakes. So here we have one of our volunteer divers lighting this. We don't remove any of the artifacts from our shipwrecks. We catalog these only by taking information and photographs, and everything remains with the shipwreck. It's more interesting. These are tourist attractions. We have people that come from all over the world to see our shipwrecks. So by removing items from them, even us as the state, that detracts from what people are coming here to see. So we try to educate people as to why it is important to leave everything in place. And we want this to be shipwrecks to be new and to be something to discover for the next person that goes to visit them. So everything is left in place. We also do a lot of photography and videography. So we try to collect, again, information on what a site looks like, not only by taking these measurements, but also taking as many pictures as we can to add really to that description. This videographer is from the University of Wisconsin Sea Grant Institute. They've been a major supporter of our program. They host our website, wisconsinshipwrecks.org, and they also have provided us, along with Wisconsin Coastal Management Program, they've made federal funds accessible to our program. So all of our are funded by either grant or gift. We've had the privilege of receiving a number of charitable donations also from the Uline Corporation, David and Julia Uline Foundation, Hamilton Family Foundation. All sorts of people have come forward to help with this work of the state. And what we do with all this information is we use this to evaluate the sites based on standards that are set forth by the National Park Service, to understand whether these sites qualify to be nominated for the National Register of Historic Places. And this provides a federal level of protection for our sites. And we have 75 shipwrecks that are underwater sites that are listed on the National Register of Historic Places. And that's more individually listed shipwrecks than any other state. So that's really something that we should be proud of here in Wisconsin. And I'm proud of. So Milwaukee, I'm really going to acquire by discussing the importance of Milwaukee's role in U.S. and world commerce. But we really only have to look as far as this really iconic poster. You know, Milwaukee's slogan was "Milwaukee feeds and supplies the world." And this was started really in 1898, and this was on the cover of the Book of Milwaukee, which was published by the Evening Wisconsin in 1901. But this really, Milwaukee, the epicenter of the world, and really shows, I believe it too. This this is really where most of the shipping for the Great Lakes in the late 1880s, this was the epicenter of grain and lumber, as well as Chicago. So I think Milwaukee and Chicago pretty much share that, and it would go back and forth as far as which port was more prominent. We really only have to look also to this bird's eye view from 1853. We see here, although this is a little grainy, there's a large number of vessels that are anchored offshore and they're waiting to load or unload cargo. There's several docked along the river, moored up. We understand that Milwaukee really provided a place for immigrants to come aboard vessels that sailed on the Great Lakes. But then when they came here, the products that they produced, the commercial products and the agriculture, then could very easily be moved back eastward. And again, one of the most prominent cargoes that shipped out of Milwaukee was grain. And we can see here by looking at this, this is a constructed image. So you want to think about a layered image, something that would have an early Photoshop. McCormick International Harvester put this together to show this wheat reaper, the wheat thresher in the foreground, and we see in the background this consort of ships being towed out onto the lake, this really shows the harvesting of grain, the loading of the ships, and this connectivity to the eastern ports through this maritime commerce. And this really was very representative of what was going on in Milwaukee. We had these immigrants coming in. They would move out to the Great Plains. They would farm and produce, get that grain back to, and then it was shipped then out to these eastern ports. And then what came back aboard the same ships was coal, and the coal was as soon as the grain was offloaded, either at Erie, or if they were canalers, a specific kind of vessel designed for the Great Lakes, they could go through the Welland Canal and go out to the eastern ports, and then they would return with these cargoes of coal. And we see this H.H. Bennett photo of men hand unloading some of the schooners filled with coal. The coal then would be put on carts, taken throughout the city, and really used to fuel the factories and warm the homes as the city was developing. Can you imagine what the bread tasted like after the grain was then loaded right back up after the coal was removed? Kind of makes me wonder a little bit about that. So I want to kind of transfer and talk about some recent projects that we have worked on in the Milwaukee area, and sort of give you sort of a diverse look at some of the things that we are looking at. And the first ship that I wanted to start with was the Appomattox. So the Appomattox was built in 1898 at West Bay City, Michigan. You can see here I have her labeled as Hull 78. Or 76, sorry, and she was built at the James Davidson Yard there. James Davidson was a master shipbuilder. He built over 100 vessels at this yard, and he was known for building massive wooden steamers and barges, most of which he would use in his own personal fleet. The Appomattox was 319 feet long with a 42-foot beam. And on the 2nd of November, 1905, the Appomattox was towing the barge Santiago. Both of them were loaded with coal. And as they were proceeding along the west shore of Lake Michigan, they encountered a bank of dense industrial smoke that was coming from Milwaukee. And the combination of the smoke and fog obscured the range lights at the north end of Milwaukee. And they mistook where the harbor was and came a little too close to shore, grounding on rock bottom near North Point. This is where present-day Atwater Beach is. A third vessel that was following not too far behind them, actually following their lights, was the steamer Iowa, and she became grounded as well. So there's these three massive ships that are stranded just north of North Point, off of what's now Atwater Beach. So the Santiago and the Iowa were able to be freed by tugs, but the Appomattox was so far and fast aground that they had trouble getting her off, and a storm came up. She began pounding on the bottom in the waves, and over the next several days, she began breaking up. She was eventually declared a total loss and abandoned. There was a salvage that was made on her, but for the most part, she's laid out there on the bottom. There's several football fields full of oak on the bottom that are right off Atwater Beach. Now, Appomattox was, when she was constructed, she was the largest wooden bulk steamer ever built on the Great Lakes. And she had this oak hull, but what allowed her to exist and be so large and still be constructed of oak was that she had this internal system of arches and basket weave framing that was made out of steel. So she was sort of this mixed construction. She was really an engineering marvel. And she was powered by this triple expansion steam engine, and it just wasn't the norm of the time for wooden vessels to be built. James Davidson, her build owner, was a master shipbuilder. And he had the foresight to buy up vast forests of timber, timber that would have been suitable for construction of these large vessels ahead of a lot of his competitors. So when his competitors were forced to switch to steel and really retool, he was still able to build these ships. And they could compete with the larger steel vessels because they didn't really require the comparable horsepower to move them, and so they could whereas the steel vessels would have to could carry more cargo independently, they couldn't necessarily tow barges, and so they could go in consort with these large wooden steamers, and then consorts of barges towed behind, and really carry the same amount of cargo, if not more, to market at a fraction of the cost. So Davidson really was this sort of innovator in thinking about how he could continue to build these larger and larger vessels and still remain constructing in wood. This is a picture of the Davidson Yard, and you can even see here, if you look very carefully, three ships on the ways, one here, and one in the background. None of these are the Appomattox, but it kind of gives you the idea that they were constructing on a mast. And a lot of times they were, they had the cutters were cutting the wood, and they basically pieced these ships together. However, they were making slight changes, and they were altering their design and really the engineering that they did on them as each one was produced. And we're fortunate enough here in Wisconsin to have 8 of these vessels on our lake bottom, and so we're able to study really how he was able to elongate the vessel and make it function as he was getting longer and longer over time. And this is a project that we're currently working on. So if you look here at this illustration, we really see the forces of the sea on these vessels as they you have a wave that passes over, it causes it really to bend and move in the center. And this working through the waves opens up the seams of ships, and so he and twists the hull as well. And so he needed to figure out a way to work around that. So as ships got older, they would naturally hog and sag depending on how you loaded them. So meaning that they would sag in the center, or they would hog and bend at the ends. And so in order to overcome this, again, he tried to engineer his way out of these problems. So I think to understand a little more about this, you have to think about just how regular vessels are made. If you look at the very top of this image, you can see, if you have a small ship, you have a keel, the floor of the vessel, and then the keelson laid down on top of it. But as you needed more longitudinal strength, we have these large timbers that are stacked up in the center. So if you see here, now not only do you have the keel and keelson, but you have on either side of this rider keelsons, and on top a rider. And again, as we get even longer, we end up with the rider with sister keelsons on either side, and sister rider keelsons. And as we get even longer, we end up with a second rider and sisters. And if you want to go outbound, they're called cousins. So, but this takes up a lot of cargo capacity down the center line of the ship. So what Davidson did was he instead took the keelson and lined it with steel on either side. And we see this is 1 inch thick steel plate. And then he also added floor keelsons on either side. So again, you don't have that big bulk of keelson assemblage through the center, but instead these floor keelsons along the bottom to reinforce the floor. And we see that by looking just at the shipwreck on the bottom. And we see these floor keelsons underneath my partner, archaeologist Caitlin Zant. You have 6 floor keelsons, which are on either side of that massive central keelson. And we see, again, here's our boat parked off Atwater Beach. And sometimes if you look out from the bluff at Atwater, you can see the mooring buoy that marks the shipwreck. But we can see rows and rows of oak along the bottom. And even the frames are triple framed. Normally vessels have, a single for a very lightly built vessel, or are double framed for those that need a little bit more support. But this is a triple framed vessel. Again, just massive pieces of oak. We were able to come up with one blueprint for for one of the Davidson vessels. This is the Thomas Cranage. And we see, and this is the only blueprint that we know that's in existence of a Davidson vessel. It's not exact to what would have been seen on the Appomattox. This is a little bit earlier built and a smaller vessel. But we can really see that it did have a hogging arch here, which goes the length of the vessel. The arch, of course, is the strongest shape that we know. And so this took some of that longitudinal stress off of the ship and gave it a lot of support as it was going over the waves to prevent it from hogging and sagging. We see a remnant of this on the bottom here. In this piece that is part of the Appomattox. We also see cross bracing, which was very indicative of Davidson built ships. And again, if we look at a closer image of this, we can see that it is peened through. So you have the bolts going through the cross bracing, and it would sandwich in with the ceiling planking, the planking that's on the inside of the ship, the outer hull planking, and all of the frames, and would be driven through with these bolts. So massive amounts of bolting we're seeing all the way through on the vessel. And again, this cross bracing, very indicative of Davidson ships. So this is the first of our site plans, which was done in 2003, and this is the main section of the ship, and we see that there's quite a bit of it missing. We only see the port side. The starboard side is missing, as well as a large piece of the port side not there. Now, when we did this survey, we also, again, do a lot of photography. And when I was out to try to take additional pictures, one of our volunteers, Kim Stomelfeld, said, there's another ship that's just in toward shore. It's called the Josephine. It had been known by a lot of divers, and it was... if you know where Atwater Beach is, there's an old pier which is just north of the beach area, the area that's enclosed in the chain gates, and right off the end of that, and you can look at this on Google Earth and still spot it. There's this piece of hull. So we went to look at it, and this isn't the Josephine. This is actually another piece of the missing hull of the Appomattox. So we went ahead and mapped this, and this allowed us to describe that hogging arch is not only a single on Appomattox as it was on Thomas Cranage, but there are two hogging arches. One is internal, and one is on the inside of the ceiling planking. So we were able to extend the boundary of what was the National Register site to include this additional piece, which also belonged to the Appomattox site. Okay, so we're still missing a large piece of hull section, and a few years later we received information from Jerry Geyer. He's a wreck hunter in the Milwaukee area, and he said that there's some debris which is just north of the Appomattox site, and we thought, well, maybe Josephine, and so we thought, well, we'll go look at it, and it was this capstan, which is fairly small and probably not associated with the Appomattox, but we're not entirely sure why. It's very small. And then also another large piece of hull section. And again, this is Caitlin Zant, my partner, drawing on the bottom. And we went out to draw this. And again, this is not the Josephine. The Josephine was a sandsucker, and she was 99 feet long, and this piece of wreckage was over 200. And this is out by there's a science buoy. Again, if you stand on the bluff at Atwater and you look out, you can see about where this piece is. It's marked by that yellow scientific buoy that's put in by UWM. And so this is that missing piece, this whole starboard side of the Appomattox. So again, we still have not found the Josephine. It's supposed to be somewhere in this vicinity, but it's not there. So then this was another addition to the National Register nomination when this hull section was drawn on. So you see here we have the entire side of the Appomattox that had floated away and was a couple hundred yards away from where the main body of the wreck site is. So when you look at where everything is on the bottom, again, you have that zigzag path that's at the top of going down to the beach above the beach at Atwater, and we can look out and you can see that just north of there is that starboard side, the port side all the way out. So there's a large scatter and debris field that's associated with this wreck. But it allowed us really to see, what the capacity was for James Davidson to be able to build these monstrous, what they call them, Goliath ships of that time, and to compete with wooden vessels when all of his contemporaries had switched to steel. So we also have a program which is called the Maritime Trails Program, and part of that is trying to connect people with maritime sites, put you in the place where this shipwrecked. And so at Atwater Beach, just off the playground, we have one of our Maritime Trails markers, which tells about the shipwrecks of the Appomattox. And you can see, if you look very carefully, see that little spot. That's our buoy. That's a buoy that's in place during the season that marks the site of the Appomattox. If you want to go out with your boat or your kayak, you can certainly see the wreckage depending on the day. So the next ship that I wanted to share with you is the amba. So EMBA. And this is a slightly different kind of vessel, but really tells a unique piece of Milwaukee history. So she actually wasn't built as the emba. That's actually her second name. She was built in 1890 again at Bay City, Michigan. However, built by Frank Wheeler. And Wheeler was a competitor of James Davidson. They were right across the bay from one another, and one would build a large wooden vessel, and then the other one would build a larger wooden vessel, and they went back and forth between the two of them as to what the largest wooden vessel of the time was, and it was kind of this very much competitive nature going on. When she was constructed, she was known as the AC Tuxbury, and she was 181 feet long and 35-foot beam. She ended up being scuttled off Milwaukee in 1932, but that's well after her time as a three-masted schooner. She started out three-masted. She was cut down to what's called a Grand Haven rig. They removed the mainmast or the central mast on the ship, and that allowed them to have more cargo capacity on their deck, and also it made it a little bit easier for sail handling of the vessel. She was built by Wheeler as a series of 3 ships. So we see here she was always to be towed by the W.H. Sawyer, which is the steam vessel here. And then she had an identical twin built exactly the same time, which was called the Redfield. So we see, I believe this one is the Redfield, and I believe this one is the Tuxbury. Oh, I'm sorry, I got those backwards. This is the Sawyer, this is the Tuxbury, and this is the Redfield. So this would have become the emba later on. She was renamed in 1924 when she was purchased by the Milwaukee Electric Railway and Company. At that time, they removed her mast, and they added some self-unloading equipment to her, and she became one of the city's earliest self-unloaders. They transformed her from that schooner barge configuration that I showed you earlier into a barge that was towed only by the company's towboats or tugboats on the rivers. So she was named emba. So emba means Employee Mutual Benefit Association. That was a fraternal organization of the company. So for $1, if you were an employee of the company, you could get health care for your family. And it really supported health and welfare for the employees of the Milwaukee Electric Railway and Light Company. Because it was so much in favor by the employees, they decided to name the ship after it. And Milwaukee Electric Railway had a number of vessels. Although the Tuxbury, renamed the emba, was one of their older ones. They had a steel scow. They had 2 other barges, the Collier and the Transfer, and the Tug Lorena, which you can see in this company document. This is a little grainy, but they did have a number of other vessels. And what they did with these ships is they removed the masts, and then into the hold. And this is a schematic of a metal vessel, but much later. But it kind of gives you the idea that they put in a hopper system, and so down the center line of the ship, they would have these the hoppers. They would remove a lot of the deck beams and planking on the top and drop right into the hold. Then it would have these conveyor belts that would run the length of the vessel, taking it to a central point where it would move any coal that could be dropped through chutes onto this conveyor to this thwartship conveyor, which would take it then up to a tower and to the self-unloading mechanism. They would get coal from Jones Island, the Jones Island coal facility. They see a lot of lake ships would come in, deposit their coal, and then these Milwaukee Electric railway barges would transfer this coal onto into their holds of the ship, and they would go upriver to the company's electric plants. Now, they didn't have any means of mechanizing the removal of the coal. They did have self-unloaders, but they didn't have any machinery on board to drive that, because they would just plug into the electric plant, and that would allow them to run this self-unloading equipment. We see, if we look at the ship on the bottom, that it's very much intact. We see the bow of the ship here is the only place that it's sustained any damage. So you see it sort of split at the waterline and sort of filleted open a little bit there, but otherwise it's very much intact. We see an air scoop here. There must have been a lot of coal dust that made it difficult to breathe below decks as the men ran under the hoppers trying to open those doors. And so they must have scrapped this off of another vessel in order to try to bring in some air to that lower hull area. But this still remains kind of shoved up under the bow. And we look here at these compartments that run the length of the ship. And you can actually see, if you look very closely, there's sacrificial wood which has been placed on top of the hoppers. So as they drop the coal through, it wouldn't just, or if it would ruin the top portion of this, that could be replaced very, very easily. And then there are doors that are underneath all along here. So the men would run up these aisles on either side. And as coal needed to be dropped into the longitudinal conveyor, they could open the doors of the chutes, and that would allow that to drop down. And you see part of the conveyor system is still underneath in the shipwreck. So here's the aft part of that conveyor, and we see that it brings it all the way back to here. The belts are no longer there, but you see the whole conveyor system is still set up. And this is an athwartship conveyor, which then would have brought it to the center, where it would have been scooped up by this series of buckets and belts and brought up onto the tower. So you can see the buckets are still here, and they're still attached to the belt and the ratchet mechanism at the top, which would have drawn it up and allowed them to offload that coal very easily right into the power plant. So this shipwreck sits in 155 feet of water, but you can reach the top of it at about 135, the top of this conveyor mechanism. So you can see there's stairs that lead up that would have allowed someone to manually operate the boom. And in fact, the only thing that's not on the shipwreck is the boom. That probably would have gotten reused, because when they brought the transfer in, that replaced the emba for use by the electric company, and that led to the scuttling of the emba. So when we also look at the shipwreck here, we see that a number of the beams have been removed. We see this cut here. We also see no deck planking. So that would have allowed the coal to really just come right down and sit on the hopper. And because this is a scuttling, we also see that they have large stones that were placed inside that would have helped the ship settle to the bottom when it was no longer needed and no longer of use for the company. So this is a mosaic. It's about 120 images, which are stitched together, which show the amba in entirety. And you can see the little diver here off the bow. That's me for scale. So it's a fairly large ship, but we can see that, again, a lot of the deck beams have been removed. All of the deck planking is missing, and we see a number of those rocks that were put into to help it to the bottom. But a really cool shipwreck if you should ever get the chance to go and visit it. All right, the last ship that I wanted to cover is our work on the car ferry Milwaukee. The car ferry Milwaukee was actually named the Manistee Marquette and Northern #1 originally when it was built in 1903. She was built by the American Shipbuilding Company in Cleveland, Ohio, and she was a steel vessel. She was of a design that was for the railroads. They had 4 parallel tracks. They could roll on 28 rail cars, which would then be used in year-round service to connect the railroad on either side of Lake Michigan. She foundered in a brutal storm on the night of the 22nd of October, 1929, under the command of a captain named Robert Badweather, or alternately called Heavy Weather McKay. And none of her 47 crew members survived. The location of the ship remained a mystery for well over half a century. So she was purchased in 1908 by the Grand Trunk Line, and this is when her name changed to Milwaukee. And she was only on the route between Milwaukee and Grand Haven. And then sometime later that year, the Pere Marquette 18, bound between Milwaukee and Ludington, sank in a storm with 28 of her 62 passengers and crew perished. With that loss, the Steam Inspection Service reviewed the design of car ferries, and they came to a conclusion that a following sea likely led to the Pere Marquette 18's demise. So if we look here, this is the clamshell seagate. This is on the Spartan. So this is a much later ship, but it really gives a good example of what that would have looked like. They would have backed into this apron, lined up very accurately the rail lines, so they could roll on sets of rail cars, and then they would block them all in place. And then when they were ready to set sail, the seagate would be brought down before they would leave. So this was mandated after the loss of the Pere Marquette 18, and all previously built car ferries were forced to be retrofit with this. However, there wasn't immediate compliance to this, and so the Milwaukee only received her seagate in 1913. This is actually a photo of the Milwaukee with her seagate lowered. So on the night of October 22nd, 1929, she again was under the command of Robert Badweather McKay, her captain, and she took on board 28 eastbound rail cars. They were rolled onto her deck about 2:30 p.m. She had over 1 million pounds of freight aboard. And in those freight cars were a number of items. There was wood veneer, vegetables, butter, cheese, bathtubs, other mixtures, corn, feed, and also some automobiles. So this is her captain, Robert McKay. And at 3 o'clock, her seagate was lowered, and she proceeded out of the harbor into the teeth of a gale. A number of other vessels had come in from the lake and not to go back out on their return course. In fact, some of the crew members aboard the Milwaukee didn't think that they were going to sail, and they went. And so there were a number of men missing. They were very surprised, decided to bring up steam. So when they left, that was the last really that anyone saw of them, and they became really a ghost ship for so many times. It took the 28 rail cars down, as well as the 48 men in her hull. And there was some thought as to what had happened to it, but no one really knew until we started looking at the shipwreck. So she didn't make the shore on the other side of the lake. She didn't come back to Milwaukee. And we see the next morning, a couple days later, bodies start washing up on shore. Other debris begins washing up all over the Lake Michigan shoreline. And we see these headlines along with those of an unstable market. The stock market is again going to fluctuate, leading up to the beginning of the Great Depression, which is only a few days later. So one of the things that came up in the debris was this letter. So, and this came in a message case. So all ships of the line, Grand Trunk Line, and many others had these message cases. They were watertight metal cases, and they were for preserving messages, in the event of a catastrophe. And so, as some Coast Guard men were searching through debris associated with a lifeboat over on the Michigan shore, they came across this thing, and inside it was this handwritten message that's on Grand Trunk stationery. And as you can see here, it says the SS Milwaukee. I'm going to start reading at the top here very faintly. October 22nd, 8:30 p.m. The ship is making water fast. We have turned around and headed for Milwaukee. Pumps are working, but seagate is bent in and can't keep the water out. The flicker is flooded. The seas are tremendous. Things look bad. The crew roll is about the same as on last payday, and the note is signed A.R. Sadden, Purser. Watches on the bodies of some of the dead that came ashore were stopped at 9:35 p.m. So this is written approximately an hour before the men were in the water. This was found at National Archives by a researcher, and is like one of the prized possessions in their collection. It was matched up with the handwriting of the purser, and also was they made sure that it was the stationery of the Grand Trunk Line, so it was authentic. So let's take a look at what the shipwreck looks like on the bottom. We see here the great bow of the Milwaukee. It's a massive ship. It's 338 feet long and a 52-foot beam. And so all we really know is what we know from the note. That's the closest you can get really to an eyewitness, is someone writing as the ship is sinking. We see that a lot of the upper deck works have collapsed, but as we look through here, we can actually see the remains of some of the rail cars that are still filled with the bathroom fixtures. These are Kohler fixtures. We see here, these are sinks. Those are the bases of sinks. We see bathtubs in this particular rail car. And these are toilet cisterns. They're sort of falling out of another one. We also can look up toward the bow and down a deck level, and we see here that this is one of the couplers. There have been 4 of these at the bow of the ship, and so as those sets of cars were rolled in, they would have been coupled in place to keep them and prevent them from rolling around. And there are no rail cars that remain attached to any of the couplers at the bow. So this is really a clue for us that the rail cars had gotten loose in the event of the sinking. We can also see, when we look very carefully at the wreckage, this is the frame of one of the rail cars, which is protruding through the side hull of the ship. In fact, it's knocked out the hull of the ship and it's sort of folded over on top of itself. So this is the inside of the ship hull, and it's folded out because this rail car has beat through. We figured out the metal thicknesses above the rail deck, or at the rail deck and above, is slightly thinner on the hull than at there and below the water line. So this is probably because these were in year-round service, and so they did encounter ice, but this also could contribute to the sinking, as that thinner metal was easier to knock out when those rail cars came loose and started floating around and bashing around inside. Here's the seagate, and we know from the note that the seagate, they mentioned the seagate was bent in. So there's been a couple television shows which, I don't know, have really great graphics, and they show the seagate being bent out. It is not bent out. When you take the measurements on this and you recreate the drawing and you put it back on the hull, it is actually bent in. However, one of the hinges has come off and it's fallen. So the tremendous impact of the waves at their stern, boarding even at the stern and over that stern gate, caused this metal to warp and fold in on itself. And that is what crinkled that seagate in. And my coworker went in and very systematically counted every one of the rail cars, and we do have evidence of all 28 rail cars still aboard the vessel. So one of the thoughts was that some of the rail cars had come loose, that they had broken the stern off and or the seagate off and had fallen aft of the ship, and that's just not the case. With side scan sonar, we've done a complete search of the area and haven't found any rail cars, but also evidence of all of them remains aboard. The only thing that isn't there is one of the rail trucks. So these cars, like roller skates, they sit on top of sets of wheels, trucks. And one of the trucks is underneath the ship. So it's actually underneath, this is the propeller shaft, and that rail truck sits underneath there. There's no rail car underneath. You would see evidence of the wood smashed out or some of the framing of the rail car, and the only thing there is the truck, which did come loose and came out, I guess, before they sank, because the ship is sitting on top of it. We also see here evidence still remaining of paint on the vessel. So we see here, this is the chart room. The wheelhouse would have been above this in its reconstruction after 1908. The wheelhouse was put up a little bit higher, like a Monkey Island type of wheelhouse. This would have been the chart room, but we see the name over the door. And we do see this picture was taken in 2005. And when we look at the ship 10 years later, the differences that we're seeing are differences between zebra mussels and quagga mussel infestations. We see a lot of zebras here. It's relatively deep. It's in 110 feet of water, but we see deterioration and really massive colonization, which has happened, in this 10-year period. Sea divers are still scraping the mussels off. This is good and bad. You can still see the paint. However, every time that they scrape over it, sometimes the mussels have embedded into this, and you're pulling off little bits of paint and little bits of metal with it as it's deteriorating. But we also see that there's some deterioration which has happened to the wreck here, and we see a lot of the wire that was around the top of this structure is gone. We see that the windows are now broken out of this. This could be a combination, not only blaming it on the mussels, but this is a very, very popular shipwreck site. And I mean, quite frankly, I think we're loving the ship to death. So I think that the impact of divers is really doing its toll on this shipwreck site, and we need to very much watch that. Again, here's 2005, looking at that chart room structure head on. And here we are in 2015. So we can really see changes that are occurring over time. And this is something that we're doing with a lot of our shipwrecks. In fact, we were just funded by the Fund for Lake Michigan to begin a degradation study on this ship. So we can get photogrammetry imagery of what the ship looks like, and then take a look again in another 5 or 10 years and see what the impact is of invasive species and of divers on these resources over time. So we do have a maritime trail sign for this particular shipwreck too. It is on the Summerfest grounds. I hope you go to see it because it's sitting right next to one of the anchors from the ship that was recovered. And if you can't get into the Summerfest grounds, because sometimes this area is closed down a little bit, you can still go out to Jones Island, and at Little Cashew Park is the other anchor from the Milwaukee car ferry. So you can see the second one there. So both of the anchors still live on in the city of Milwaukee. So, as I said, we have a website which is hosted by the University of Wisconsin Sea Grant Institute, and all of our research goes there. So every one of the shipwrecks that we look at and all the sites that we examine, all of that information is warehoused in this site. We have information on all 727 shipwrecks in Wisconsin waters here, and that is changing all the time. We're uploading data and changing things as we information as we find it, putting up more pictures and videos and information. We have attractions. This is lighthouses and museums and parks and anything that has maritime related features. Again, sort of geo-referenced here, and information kept there. And then any of our site plans and field reports are housed under the Learn section, as well as a number of other fun things for kids. But if you'd like to get a hold of us and you have any questions after this, you don't even have to remember my name. You can just click Contact Us, and either I or, again, my coworker, Caitlin Zant, both get emails from the Contact Us button. So one of us will be able to answer any questions that you have. So I hope you enjoyed listening to some of the stories and seeing the diversity of things that we learn from our resources that are still on our bottomlands. And I hope if you get the chance, you'll go visit them and appreciate and love them too. Thank you.
Awesome, Tamara. That has anybody ever told you that you have like one of the coolest jobs?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you get that. You get that a few times.
Oh yeah.
So we got a bunch of great questions popping up here. So if anybody else has one, now is the time. So throw those in the comments. We'll start. We'll go from the end and work back to the
Oh
beginning.
no.
The Milwaukee is fresh. Um, so Michaela, there I am. Michaela wants to know. Oh, that's not the right one. There we go. How was the Milwaukee found?
The Milwaukee was found in 1971 by shipwreck hunters in the Milwaukee area. I'm not sure if it was John Steele or if it was Kent Bell Richard, a combination of the two, but a good number of shipwrecks were found by that pair. But
Okay.
it's 1971.
Okay. Um, when I guess to kind of follow up on that, like as far as the history of diving for shipwrecks in Wisconsin, how did that kind of evolve?
Oh my goodness! So I guess that.
That's a whole presentation unto itself. But like, what's
Well,
the
I
note
think that
card version?
I mean, going back to your exhibit, you have quite a bit on Desco, right? So that's actually Desco company history. So we have a lot of salvage that happened really in the 1930s and earlier in Wisconsin. So you know, this is like it's one of these weird things. It's like you would think that the epicenter of North American diving would be one of the coasts or Florida or something.
Sure.
It's actually Milwaukee.
Wow.
Um, you know, I was talking with one of our volunteers, a very well-known researcher named Dr. Richard Boyd, and we were trying to um, really catalog some of the important events and places and people that were involved with North American diving. And he said his line is, if you threw a dart and you hit somewhere around Racine, you would really have the epicenter where it all started. Uh,
Oh no. I hope we didn't lose you just like right now. Oh, there you are.
oh,
Maybe.
yeah. So you have Desco out of Milwaukee.
Yep.
So you have Max G. Knoll setting the world record. In right off the shore. You know, the first week in December. I think it was I can't even remember the dates now, but um, very early. And then you have Scuba Pro, which is Johnson Wax. You have just over the border, Patty, the Professional Association of Dive Instructors, is from Northport, Illinois. You know, I mean, so and you wouldn't
Wow.
think that because they're out of California now, and they're like very much California centric. It that started like here, you know.
Wow.
And you just have all of this very important history which is happening right around the Milwaukee area. So yeah, Daycor is right out again in Illinois. So yeah,
Sure.
Emba.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the location of the EMBA? Paul wants to know.
Okay, that is located about 5.5 miles out of the main entrance. So just right out there, not too very far. We have all of the locational information .org, so you can go there and get the GPS coordinates.
Oh, fun. Um, do this one next. I think that kind of ties in.
Okay.
Okay, so as a fellow Lake Michigan diver myself, says Aaron, huge fan of Milwaukee. First off, do you need like a permit to go dive on some of these things, or do you just do it? And then how best do you go about it without damaging the artifact?
Okay, so you do not need a permit to go diving on shipwrecks. So to find the location, the easiest way to do is to look at wisconsinshipwrecks.org. All of the known shipwrecks are on a map, and they have a green dot. If it has a red dot, it's like the most likely location of the ship loss, and you can go look for it, but that means that it has not been located, and the numbers are not necessarily accurate. So all the known shipwrecks are green. Go there, a lot of times they are marked either by local divers or by state mooring buoys. So you can, and if they are not, then you're going to have some way of finding it on the bottom. So a depth finder, a bottom finder, you can look at a graph. You usually see where the shipwreck comes up on the bottom, and we have not for at least 15 years, I can tell you, anchored into shipwrecks. We usually mark shipwrecks and then anchor nearby and then go diving by the marker. If you're going to put an anchor down and back over the shipwreck or try to hook it or something like that, you are just going to cause damage to the shipwreck, and that is not great for the resource. And if you do cause damage and are caught causing damage, then it can be a fine.
Yeah. And nobody wants any part of the damage or the fine or anything.
Well, you don't want to damage things for other people either. So
absolutely, no. So we'll do one question to wrap up. I'm sure you get this one a handful of times. Equivalencies. What is Milwaukee or Wisconsin's Titanic? Like, what is there one that was like, you think of Titanic, it's like the unsinkable ship and all these people perished in it. Is there something that has an equivalent in Wisconsin maritime history?
There's in Wisconsin's maritime history, I don't think there's going to be as devastating as a loss as Titanic. I would think there are any number of these sort of ghost ships, fantastic amounts of loss of life. Even Milwaukee Car Ferry is there's 47 men that lost their lives on that. That's very, very tragic. Or you can even think as a Christmas tree ship, the Rouse Simmons. That's one that's thought of as, 16 lives were lost. Certainly not as many as Titanic either. Any time that there are men that spent their lives there, dedicated most of their time and lives, and that was their livelihood, but then also lost their lives. It's very sad and profound story.
Sure.
That really tells about the struggles of the lakes.
Well, on that happy note, I think that's a good place to wrap up for tonight. Tamara, thanks so much to you and the Wisconsin Historical Society for doing this talk for us tonight, and for kicking off this series of talks to do with our exhibit, Milwaukee, Where the Waters Meet. I hope that you, Tamara, can make the trip over to Milwaukee to see it in its full glory.
I do too, yeah.
and we can't wait for everybody to see the new exhibit a week from today. It opens at the Historical Society downtown Milwaukee, and a week from today also our virtual program right here again is Pay What You Want, and it's John Gerda, a Milwaukee city built on water. So we have some great things to start off the exhibit, and we're going to keep it going the weeks and months as we get more into it. But Tamara, thanks so much for your time tonight.
Thank you.
All right, everyone.